So, for my final project, I decided to look at the story of a woman named Sally Krawcheck. And it's a very interesting story because it highlights the conflict of interest between the goals of a company and the goals of the people who the company is supposed to represent. And in the end, you'll see that Krawcheck stood up twice for what she believed in, displaying the virtue of fortitude, being brave enough to put her own job on the line for what she believed. So who is this woman? Well, Sally Krawcheck was known as arguably the highest profile woman on Wall Street through the early 2000s. Um, she was the head of Citigroup's wealth management unit and had previously risen up from being at Smith Barney, which was a subsidiary of Citigroup. And so a little bit of background. At the apex, kind of the height of the financial crisis, one of the things that happened was that a lot of people had put investments into what they thought were relatively low risk alternatives to cash called auction rate securities, which ideally would give them a higher return than just cash sitting in a bank account. Unfortunately, when the financial crisis happened, these assets were basically rendered worthless. And so Krawcheck would get calls every day from these high profile investors saying, like, well, I had this money set aside for my daughter's wedding and it's gone. Like, what can I do? So Krawcheck argued that Citigroup should try and reimburse these clients, a lot of whom were lucrative, high-profile accounts. And she actually offered what essentially was a zero-interest loan to these clients, which is very risky to the bank because essentially these people could just take the money and run. So that's what she decided to do. Unfortunately, the CEO of Citigroup at the time was a man named Vikram Pandit, and he disagreed with her. He basically said that, you know what, tough luck on these people. They should have known that it's a risk of investing, that your assets could freeze and the market crashes and you lose your money. So this put Krawcheck in direct conflict with what the head of the company is saying to do. She stood up for what she believed in, and eventually, in what was a rather public and rather ugly schism, she was fired. So fast forward a year. She's now the head of the wealth management unit at Bank of America Merrill Lynch, so similar position at a similar company. And while she's there, she saw that Merrill Lynch offered this thing called a stable value fund. And it was meant to be a safe investment, low risk, low return, that was used mostly in retirement plans, so 401ks. The problem is, during the financial crisis, the people that managed the account were trying to chase yield, and this led to them investing in riskier investments, and those investments started to crash. So the stable value fund wasn't so stable. So people behind the scenes at Merrill knew this was the case, but weren't really doing anything about it. So when Krawcheck comes in, she starts kind of digging around, and she says, "Well, okay, what can we do for this?" So she starts asking people, and everyone say, "Yeah, you know what? Just kind of sweep this under the rug. Unfortunately, there's not much we can do about it." Similar to what Pandit was saying at Citigroup, saying, "You know what? It's just a risk of investing." But Krawcheck said, "You know what? That's not true. We hold a higher standard. This is something that we back as a safe investment. We need to do more." So she went all the way up to the CEO and convinced the CEO to put some assets towards this stable value fund. She was moved by these stories of low-income investors at companies like Walmart basically having $75,000 in a 401k and putting it in this low-return fund, thinking that it's a safe investment, and it's not. And she decided, you know what, I have to do it. So she convinced the CEO of Merrill Lynch to basically stabilize the stable value fund. And so she was successful in doing that. However, it kind of caused a little bit of a political schism, and a lot of people didn't like what she was doing. And eventually she claims that it kind of forced her out of the company. So we see in this story, Krawcheck twice getting basically kicked out for sticking up for what she believed in. And that's why this story caught my eye. Because it's a woman at a high-level position putting her own neck on the chopping block twice to protect the value of these people that are a key part of this company. And I think it kind of draws into account these questions of, can there be two common goods? Is there conflict between the good of the company and the good of the investors. And in the end, it's not fair for a company like Bank of America Merrill Lynch or Citigroup to let investments that they really back as safe spiral out of control and make these people lose everything that put their trust in these companies. And for Krawcheck to stand up like this took fortitude. And even more fortitude in the second instance when she had already gotten fired for doing this before. And so I think that this story is relevant to students because it poses questions like, how much is a company ethically required to do in order to ensure the well-being of its clients? Is it fair to do so even when this well-being of the clients may be counterintuitive to the interests of the company? But I think in the end that this woman shows a clear appreciation for the fact that companies should be held to a higher standard for their clients, and she was willing to put her own job on the line twice.